Hi, my name's Liam Kearney from the Australian Institute of International Affairs Young Professionals Network. Today we're very lucky to be joined by Madeleine King MP, the Shadow Minister for Trade and Federal Member for Brand. So thank you very much for joining us here, Ms. King.
It's a pleasure, Liam. Thanks for having me.
What a year it's been. We're nearly at the end, thank God. So in your opinion, rewinding back to before all of this craziness, what do you think the main challenges for trade were before the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure. And 2020 has been quite a year. Yeah, it's like it's been 10 years all in 1 year. So we're all kind of looking towards Christmas, I suppose. There were many challenges to trade before COVID, although the COVID pandemic and the restrictions around that have magnified kind of everything. I think that the language around trade started to change, I think most definitely in around 2016 with the leading into the American election, their last general election before this one this year. So we saw in that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the very large regional trade agreement, kind of got weaponised politically, starting with candidate Trump, who then became President Trump, but it also got taken up by the Democrats as well. We had both parties of American presidencies flat out rejecting an agreement that the existing president at the time had practically drafted. So I think that was a real challenge, and then the language that flowed from that and the consequences of the election of President Trump led to a more insular America, a continuing public language that multilateralism and open trade had served to rip off American workers, which, people it hasn't been universal benefit for free trade agreements. We all have to admit that, but nonetheless, it also hasn't been a rip-off that he said. There have been major gains in trade around the world, certainly a great gain for Australia. So there was that part of things, and then there was also a declining relationship with China, which had been on the decline almost since its apex 7 years ago or so.
So to quiz you a little bit more about
Sure.
the deteriorating relationship with China, we've obviously seen a lot of action lately.
Indeed.
It seems like every day there's a new media story. How do you frame their actions, and do you think the federal government is responding in the right way, or what would you do to them?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think there's no doubt that China itself has changed, that we can argue that, and as a country that has brought millions of people out of poverty, and our economic growth has ballooned on the back of that, we need to acknowledge that they're also entitled to change, as are we. That's just the world. We shouldn't expect a nation the size of China, with its economic significance, to do what we think it would. It can do what it wants, and it's got a new leader and taken new initiatives which wouldn't be what we'd hope for, but nonetheless, it's the world we have to live in. It's definitely different from the previous leadership of Deng Xiaoping. So what we would do differently, we have a strategic partnership supposedly with China, yet we haven't been able to. It's like that got signed, and there was a lot of celebration, and then everyone dropped the ball. Like it was job done, feet up. Let's let business get on with it, and we don't need to tend that garden anymore. But the truth is, with all these relationships, government has to put in effort every single day of every single year, not just sign a free trade agreement or an economic partnership or have the leaders visit or go to a G20 meeting. It's every single day someone's going to be thinking about what are we doing to make sure this relationship stays on this great even keel that it was. Instead, I think people kind of forgot how important this long-term diplomacy is, and the relationship drifted down. So that's what I think has happened. We forgot what we needed to do as a nation in international circles, and now we find ourselves in a pretty difficult position. there are things I would say we should do differently. I do think there are small steps Australia can take without, selling itself out. And I must add, no one's ever proposed that we trade away our values. That's just another slogan that gets thrown around with there being no substance behind it. Like, literally no one suggests we should trade away what we believe in. But what we could do is call out, elected and senior figures in the parliament that, make frankly racist comments and set up insightful kind of websites. No, but everyone knows who they are, and and they'll tell who you are. George Christensen and Erica Betts, and they're not the only ones. They're just the most high profile, and that should stop. And the Prime Minister's perfectly entitled to, party that's out of line, and that's what they should do. So there are that's quite significant, really, but it's important.
Right. So obviously, calling out that type of behaviour was in the now infamous list of 14
yes, that's right.
The Chinese put out recently. So do you think that if Scott Morrison were to come out publicly and say this type of behaviour is not on, that could pave the way for a more constructive dialogue? I mean, they've obviously said that we're waiting for China to pick up our calls. But,
no guarantees, of course not. But it can't hurt, and it's pretty simple. And it's also a reflection of our values that we don't need for Australians to be treated like that in Senate hearings, So that's also a reflection of our values. So I don't know why we can't say things like that and call out people that go against the support of multiculturalism and the Chinese diaspora in this country, which have also contributed remarkably to the growth of this country right from the times of the gold rushes. It's been here a long time, the Chinese people, and we should respect that.
Right. So you do, in that sense, see a way back from this.
Well, these are the little things that I think any government could do and should do, and we've called on the government to do exactly that. Other matters in the list of 14, we supported the government on, like the Huawei decision. Maybe it could have been handled differently, but we all say that with the benefit of hindsight. But I would add that under a Labor government, Huawei was not permitted to take part in the rollout of the NBN. So we are on the same page on this. The other one, of course, the call for the COVID inquiry, and again, we support that. But would we have led with our chin on it? It's a matter for diplomatic debate, I suppose. But there are steps along the way, and there seems to be an accumulation of missteps that lead us to this point. And a bit of humble pie in some of these respects might be helpful, but no guarantee.
Could I ask something a little bit different now?
Sure.
So we just had supposedly the world's largest trade agreement signed last week. What do you think the implications of that for the broader trade dynamics in our region?
Sure. I think the Regional Comprehensive and Economic Partnership is an important agreement among the ASEAN plus 5 now. So that for Australia, which has always led the way on moving away from tariffs and encouraging other nations to move away from tariffs, it's not our most ambitious trade agreement. But nonetheless, it sets up a framework for our part of the world that is to be embraced. And obviously, we've got the nations of ASEAN in it, and ASEAN has a different way of operating. It's all by consensus, or the ASEAN way, as they say, and it's important to be a part of things that ASEAN done and want to engage in it. So I think it's really important for Australia to embrace architecture that is developed by ASEAN and brings in other nations, including China and Japan. And it's very important. India's not involved and won't be for some time, is my personal belief. They've got their own internal politics to deal with, and again, they're a massive population that's on the edge of something brilliant, and we need to keep in contact with that country really strongly as well.
Absolutely. So, do you think there's any scope for the United States to re-engage with the TPP? MP, for example, under the Biden administration?
Look, I hope so, but to be honest, the Americans had quite a high demands of the TPP. It's a very ambitious trade agreement as compared to the RCEP. So if America wanted to come in, I think it would be harder for them to come in because every other nation has to revisit what was quite a tough thing to get through their respective parliaments, including ours. So, and I don't think it would be incoming President Biden's first priority. He's obviously got a lot on his plate, right? Starting with obviously dealing with COVID, but also he's got other trade tensions to deal with involving phase one that deals with China, as well as repairing the WTO, which must be a first order issue for them, I would think, in trade anyway.
So, how do you think Biden's handling of a new phase one agreement, or phase two, I guess we have to call it now, how do you think that's going to impact the Australian trade plans?
Yeah, well, I guess it's yet to be seen. Yeah. We've got to wait. But the trade, so-called trade war that America and China have had, which led to a trade deal, was no such thing. It was a purchasing agreement between two countries. So when China is required or agrees to purchase a whole lot of stuff from America, well, that means they're not purchasing a whole lot of stuff from us or from someone else. So, I guess you see the motivations behind it. It was an internally politically driven thing. They put in all the tariffs on steel, which we managed to get exempt from, which is great. But by the same token, there should be tariffs on these things, and that's what America has agreed to before, and they changed their mind. So one can only hope that an incoming president will look again at those bilateral purchasing agreements, and the administration will recognise that there are better ways to have international trade work.
Absolutely. So, obviously, just as one example, the steel tariffs would have had enormous secondary impact on our exporting industry here. So, is that a matter purely for the Americans and Chinese to sort amongst themselves, and we sort of deal with whatever consequences arise?
It sure feels like that, doesn't it? The world's two greatest economies having these agreements is, and the ramifications of that just demonstrates the importance of multilateralism in the WTO. So, because they are bilateral, they're both so powerful economically, what hope do countries like Australia or Indonesia or Korea or, what South American countries, what hope do they have in that competition between these two great states in a trade deal? So that's why we believe in the WTO multilateralism, because the rules really matter, and they matter most to us because we need other countries to abide by them, so things can be more fair. I hope that both nations engage more in multilateralism, and China's been a supporter. It's involved in the WTO. There are calls for reform, and they should be looked at. But it'll need the agreement of both those countries and others to do it.
Sure. So, apart from engaging more in multilateralism, what kind of stuff do we need to be doing here at home? We've been talking about diversification. It seems to be this mantra that's just parroted by the media now.
Yeah.
So, what do you think we ought to be doing here?
Yeah, well, we should pay attention to all our relationships and not let this happen again in any other sphere, right? So the government needs to immediately turn its attention to a plan rather than just say, could you please phone me, in regards to improving that relationship. Right now, the trade portfolio has been downgraded because Simon Birmingham is also the Minister for Finance, and we know it's temporary, but it certainly sends a bit of a signal, that for 8 weeks will it have been, he has been doing, 3 or 4 or 5 jobs. And, if you just think trade portfolio is about signing free trade agreements, then that sort of explains a bit of where we are, because it's a diplomatic role as well. So what can we do differently? Improve the relationships that we've got, make sure we keep the good ones that we've got and work hard at them. And the diversification project is a big one, and to say it now seems silly, but we should have been working on it all the time. Yeah, and diversification is not just the signing of the agreement, right? It's the feet on the ground, hard slog. So, and the government had made moves to do it. The Varghese report into India trade, I mean, 2.5 years later, and, you know, the latest Senate estimates revealed that actually, no, we're not going to do it. You know, so there was a roadmap. It was beautiful. It's an amazing report. Peter Varghese was a respected leader of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and it's just ignored. So, you know, we have these roadmaps that we've paid money to get and had experts participate in, yet we don't use them. And the other thing I think with diversification is it does take years. So it's easy for us to say, yeah, diversify, that's what we've got to do, but it takes decades. And so my point is every minister that has a portfolio that relates to anything we export should every morning be waking up and thinking, what can I do in my area of responsibility to improve our ability as a nation to export more things to more places? And if every minister did that every day for the next 10 years, well, we might get there. And but that's how hard it is. Like, it's a challenge. Hawke had to go to China to get these deals done, and so did John Howard for the North West Shelf to be developed for the gas export. So, you know, these are matters that require intense engagement by successive governments continually, you know, a real dedication to the cause, not just signing an agreement and putting your feet up.
Sure. So, so just as one final question,
Sure.
So what do you think is the major roadblock from, you know, we've got these plans, or fragments of them at least, what do you think is stopping us from really engaging with this ground-up diversification project across government? Do we need a new plan?
Yeah, I think we need solid leadership on it, like and an acknowledgement that it doesn't happen overnight. For a Minister of Trade or a Prime Minister or any other minister or member of Parliament to say when wine producers or crayfishers are say we're having trouble with this market in China, for them to say we'll go and diversify, well, that's flippant and it's rude and it's disrespectful to those producers, and it certainly doesn't help, and it lays the blame squarely on the businesses that have been doing this work for so long. So there has to be leadership, and it has to be enthusiastic and sustained and committed, and it's lacking at the moment from the current government, and you know, it needs to turn up at some point, or you know, we won't have diversification, and jobs will be lost, and Australia's prosperity will suffer.
Thank you very much again, Ms. King, for that great conversation.
Pleasure.
For more information, please head to the AIIA website.